Viewing a 911 call that became relevant in the Toledo case. This 911 call, a call-in by a coworker who saw an altercation when Toledo approached Kevin Dredden after finding out that Kevin was having an affair with his wife. This all happening the day before the victim in this case and her 2 children went missing. Obviously, some critical information for the prosecution to present to the jury, supported by the account of Kevin Dredden in his testimony, which we heard earlier this week. We have to break this case down because there are a lot of facts here that we need to put together, putting together a timeline and putting together this puzzle in this no-body murder case. To do that, I have Julie Rendelman. She is a LawNewz trial analyst, criminal defense attorney. Julie, now we heard this video. We just watched that long interrogation video where we heard Toledo's account of the events. He did admit that he confronted Kevin Dredden. Now that we heard this 911 call, you hear exactly what's going on. We heard that quote, "I want your job to know. I want to make sure they know you're having an affair." What do you make of this, and how does this call play into the prosecution strategy?
Well, I think everything is about motive, obviously, and you know there could be no bigger motive than a day before your wife goes missing that you find out that she is having an affair and you confront the guy who you believe she's having an affair with. I think it's so rare that we get not just a 911 call of someone saying something's happening, but that we can actually hear the defendant in the background confronting the person who he believes he's having an affair with. Now, one thing that I'm not going to say it bodes well at all for the defense, but at least if I'm looking for something as the defense, I'm going to say that he's excited, but not as excited as you'd expect someone to be who's about to kill his wife. He doesn't have a weapon. He doesn't physically harm anybody. In fact, he leaves on his own volition. So I guess if I'm the defense, I'm going to at least try to play with that to say, is he really the guy that is so excited that he's going to kill his wife within hours of this event? No. But it plays in perfectly, at least for the prosecution, in saying, not only is there a motive, there's a motive so close in time to the moment that this woman disappears and her kids.
Right, certainly a big moment for the prosecution. Also, the prosecution can take that and flip it, and I agree with you. He's not seemingly out of control. We did hear someone on that call towards the end. We got to be careful with this guy.
I heard that also.
Yep, but there's no weapons. We heard the caller say that there's no weapons. We know there's an altercation, but that's where it ended. No physical injury or anything like that. But isn't the prosecution going to say this guy was so angry and enraged that he actually went down to the place of employment to confront Kevin?
Absolutely, yes. And I think that one of the things that is added onto it is it sounds like after this confrontation, the wife doesn't seem to want to be with him anymore. And so, it's one thing to have a situation where, there's discussion about kind of the affair going on, but what has added to his anger seems to be, from at least what he's saying, and he's admitted to it, that she's indicating at least at some point that they should be getting a divorce. And so that's making it all the worse in regards to how he's kind of feeling about what happens, which could be, again, an additional motivator for why it is that his wife and 2 children are no longer here.
Right, we know he found out about the affair. We found out even in the interrogation video, which we just watched, he admitted to putting some sort of spyware on his wife's phone to track her. He knew about this affair. It led to her saying that she wanted a divorce. Obviously, that is motive. I mean, it's like a textbook, criminal law 101 motive. So the question is, how is the prosecution going to prove their case? A murder case, Julie. And I know that you are a defense attorney, so you're the best person to ask here, without a body. Now, no body murder cases aren't impossible, but they're a little bit harder for the prosecution to prove.
They are and they're not. And we go back and forth about this. The problem with not having the bodies is there's no juror in the world in this case that believes for a second that somehow this woman took off with her 2 children. It makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't fit the scenario. It doesn't fit there's no evidence of it whatsoever. So I think that the jurors believe and will believe that they're no longer alive. The only question left is, how did they die? And so it's one thing for the defendant to claim that the wife died in a scenario of which they were fighting back and forth and there was some type of self-defense. And so I can understand why that might be an issue, because you don't have the body to look at kind of what the injuries were. But how do you explain then the 2 children missing? You can't claim self-defense with 2 8- and 9-year-olds. And so, you know, whether the bodies are here or not, the bodies are not here. And so no juror, as far as I'm concerned, is going to buy that they took off. So the only other option is that they were killed. And the only way 2 children were killed is if they were murdered. And so I don't think that this is one of the tougher cases when it comes to bodies being missing.
Right. And sometimes you do have these cases where you might have no body, but you also have somebody who had said they were going to run away, or maybe was in a situation where maybe they have family out of the country or something like that, where there's some sort of tangible explanation for where they could have gone. And perhaps, and we don't know exactly what happened, but one of the things that was found in this dumpster with other stuff from the house were some stuffed animals. So the intent, if it's Toledo, if it's somebody else, perhaps that was the intention, to have some sort of evidence that would tend to show that these people skipped town.
Or the opposite, or just thinking that was, you know, not knowing where to get rid of something and getting rid of it at various spots, thinking that no one would ever connect the 2, you know, or that no one would find him. I mean, keep in mind, there's blood in the house, there's blood on the mats, there's a witness that says that he helped move his car, that he said he snapped, he went to his brother's house and basically, you know, admitted that his wife is cheating. You have neighbors that hear fighting going on. This case, to me, is overwhelming in terms of who the guilty party is.
There's a lot of evidence here, and one thing we know we're going to be seeing as this interrogation video unfolds is several different stories from Toledo, and obviously some other compelling information in that he apparently attempted suicide while being interrogated, which the prosecution fought hard yesterday to get that in, and we'll listen to that clip in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about a little bit about what we spoke about before. So some of these alternative explanations, let's say, that Toledo gave to the investigators, which we will see. One was what we just heard. Well, we had a fight and I spent the night in the car, and when I came home, police were there.
Near the cemetery.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty creepy place to take a nap at night. But all right, in that interrogation video, we heard him say that he did not reach out to his brother. He didn't reach out to anybody about his breakup, that he didn't want to burden anyone. We know that another alternative was exactly what you said. At some point, he told investigators that, yes, I killed her, but I did it in self-defense. So we'll hear that. Now, the defense not taking that route. Now we have just a full out, we didn't hear the defense in the opening say, well, yes, he is responsible for the murder of his former wife, but not the children. Now it's a full looking for an acquittal on all of that. So what do you think the strategy was there, given that there are some of these statements we anticipate hearing which would tend to contradict that?
I think the defense has a tough case. I think they know they have a tough case. I understand why they're going for a full acquittal, because they can't explain what happened to the 2 children. If you go with self-defense and the mother is killed after self-defense, then where are those 2 kids? And so because you can't explain it, the only other option is to say, no, she was upset, or her phone call with the person she was having an affair with indicated that perhaps she was so distraught that maybe she had a motive to either disappear with the children on her own, or, get out of it, she was too embarrassed, whatever it is, or that she, maybe they're going to go with suicide. I doubt it, but somehow that they're still alive, no one knows where they are, and these reasonings, i.e. DNA of blood or whatever, can be explained due to, who knows, maybe the children was injured when they were younger, and so of course you'd have blood DNA in the house, no big deal, it's their own house. But I don't blame them for kind of going for it all, because I don't think they have an option.
Right, and you make a great point, because stakes are pretty high here. If he's convicted of the murder of either one of the 2 children, then you're talking death penalty.
Exactly.
So is there a scenario here? And of course, we have to wait for all of the evidence to unfold. We're only in the midst of the prosecution's case. We're just hearing the interrogation videos. But is there a scenario here where you could get a conviction with respect to the mother, but not the children, or the children, but not the mother, or something like that, that would perhaps save him from a death penalty?
Sure. I think, I mean, look, you don't automatically get the death penalty even if the children, even if they find that the children were killed by his hand. However, I mean, I guess the jury could determine that he's telling the truth about that one moment in time of which he says that he killed the girl and the woman in self-defense, and then maybe buy some story that the neighbor had something to do with the 2 children dying. I don't really get what the neighbor's motive would be to kill the 2 children. It doesn't seem to make sense, although I do perhaps think the neighbor maybe knew a little more than the neighbor's admitting, because the whole story seems a little odd to me. But yeah, I think it's possible. I don't think it's likely.
Well, talking about the neighbor, that's an interesting point, because this morning, before court was in session, we heard the judge dealing with an issue of when witnesses are going to come in, and the neighbor, who's Tyshawn Jackson, who testified earlier this week on behalf of the prosecution, setting forth that story that Toledo came to his house, knocked on his window, asked him to follow him. He observed Toledo throwing away certain items in a dumpster, cleaning his wife's car, and said those 2 words that are very damaging. Toledo turned to me and said, "I snapped." Also in that testimony, Tyshawn Jackson says, "I didn't really ask any questions about what I was doing." Clearly, that's a little bit odd when somebody's asking you to do something in the middle of the night, follow me,
Sure.
and it's kind of engaging in these weird behaviors that would not be the norm. Interestingly enough, what we heard today, the defense wants to call Tyshawn Jackson back to the stand as part of their case, perhaps to hash out some of those questions that you posed. Is there some sort of motive? Is there more to the story that could potentially implicate him in the murder of the children? We don't really know yet. We only know what's been released to the media, but it is interesting that the defense wants this guy as part of their case.
Which is interesting also because the best time to get the witnesses on cross-examination. And so one would think on cross-examination is the perfect time to question this witness in regards to all the things that we're potentially talking about. So I'm not really sure. I would assume they're going to have to give some type of offer of proof as to why it is that they want to call him on their own. Because remember, then when they call him, then he's subject to cross-examination by the prosecution, which doesn't always bode well for the defense.
Right, and we know that he's coming back. In fact, the judge on the phone earlier today with saying to Tyshawn, "I'll call your employer to tell him that you have to come back to court." So obviously this witness is going to be testifying again, and as you said, it is an interesting scenario because he will be subject to a cross-examination by the prosecution, who will be able to treat him hostily and maybe get some more information out there. So who knows what the defense strategy is. Sometimes you just have to do everything you can because the facts aren't necessarily on your side. So it will be interesting to see if there's more to that story than we actually know right now. And another piece of information which really struck me with Tyshawn Jackson, and even in his own account of the events that we briefly mentioned, is it really believable that he was with Toledo during this whole, cleaning out the car and in this parking lot in the middle of the night and didn't ask one question?
Right.
What are we doing here?
Everyone has their own personalities. Some are leaders, some are followers. We don't know a lot about, we know pieces. We were talking a little bit about the fact that Toledo is a gang member. It looks like he was incarcerated at the time that he was interviewed. So we can, one could argue that perhaps the neighbor is scared of Toledo and is going to just do what Toledo asks him to do. I don't know. We can naturally look back on the outside and say, well, I certainly would have been like, what the hell are we doing here? Why are we here? Why am I doing this? Who are you? What do you, perhaps the nature of their relationship was such that he didn't ask questions. He just did what he was told. I don't know. I think the jury would probably be in the best position to kind of hear from him and see kind of gauge who this person is.
Right, and we'll see. Perhaps some of that information will come out on round 2 of his testimony, which looks like, if the judge gets through to his employer, will be happening early next week. So, that's pretty serious business when the judge is giving your employer a call. Julie, while we were sitting here watching some of that interrogation video, we were putting together a timeline, and I want to talk to you about that because that's really piecing together a lot of this testimony, which contradicts much of what we heard in Toledo's first interrogation video. So we know that first things first, around 12:30 a.m., we heard from some neighbors that they heard screams. They heard a woman say help. They didn't hear anything else. Any further commotion, they heard that. At 1 a.m., a phone call to Dredden, so this is the victim's boyfriend, to Dredden, a 15-minute call. He says that she sounds stressed, slurred speech, but that's the point when the police say, well, we know she was still alive at that point.
Right.
Then 5:30 a.m., Toledo's brother testifies that Toledo showed up at his house, said that his wife was cheating on him, was distraught. He offered to let him stay, but Toledo left.
Chose to leave.
Yes, and now we know he left, and guess where the next time frame is? We have 6:11 a.m. Jackson testifies that Toledo knocks on his window and asks him to come on this trip to the parking lot and everything that we just spoke about there. This is when that comment, "I snapped," comes out, and then followed by 7 a.m. text messages to Dredden from the victim's phone. Dredden saying, this doesn't seem right. There's some spelling errors with respect to names, and it just doesn't seem like the tone that she would have used. So with this timeline, in contradiction to what we heard in this first interrogation video, and again, we know that there's more contradiction to come, this is absolutely completely different set of facts than what we heard in the video, which was, I just went and sat in solitude at a cemetery in a car. So how do you, is the jury doing what we're doing? Are they making this timeline in the box?
I think what's happening is, keep in mind, like text messages, you're able to see the actual text messages arguably. So the time when they happen are kind of set in stone. People's memory as to when they're woken up in the middle of the night to hear screaming is not often always accurate unless they check the time at that very moment. I think one of the issues with the girls that when they heard what happened was they weren't sure of the exact time, but they do know it happened. It's a matter of, you know, it could be 12:30, it could be closer to 1, I don't know. It's interesting to me about the visit to the brother, and the reason it's interesting is, was the wife and the 2 children dead already, you know? And was that like a means of him either thinking about going to tell his brother that he had killed them? Was that a way of him creating an alibi? Like, I'm curious, that part is the most interesting to me, because I'm trying to understand why he went to his brother at that time, or did he think his brother was going to help him to dispose of the bodies? That part is just the most interesting aspect to me. And then the cover up at 7 o'clock when the texts are clearly made from someone other than the victim.
Yes, and that's something that absolutely is going to be addressed, because that's the time frame that, from the prosecutor's perspective, we don't really know when this happened, but we know it happened somehow in between this time frame. And one of the issues that the defense will likely bring up is just that they can't pinpoint when and how this death occurred.
Sure.
They're only showing a potential motive, but they're not really able to link it to anything else.
But so, you know, one of the things as a prosecutor you always have to say is, like, you know, we don't want to give the defendant credit because he did such a good job of disposing of the bodies. You know what I mean? And in a sense, you want to almost enrage the jury.
Right, and that could be what happens, and certainly the prosecutors will be making those points, and the defense will do what they can do in a case like this. You don't create the facts, you just argue the best case for your client.